Hello and welcome. Today we talk about Bertolt Brecht's idea of epic theatre. Now this is something that many people may have heard who are studying the European theatre, and they may be interested in knowing what epic theatre is all about. So let me first give you an idea about the text. The text is very easily available online, and the idea of epic theatre is from a larger work of Brecht, which is called Theatre for Pleasure or Theatre for Instruction. And as the name suggests, this particular essay talks about Brecht's idea of the purpose of theatre and the fact that theatre is not just supposed to be a replica of real life. He thinks and believes that theatre could be much more, and theatre could be very, very useful for people in their lives as well. So it's also kind of theatre for instruction. The text is available easily available at many websites. One of the website addresses is this, and I can forward another one. I can put this once this video is complete in the show notes. Now, what does Brecht do in the essay? I would look at this essay, and I would look at some of the extracts from this essay and talk about his conceptualization of the epic theatre. So let us begin first. Now, the first thing that Brecht does in this particular essay is that he differentiates between epic and the dramatic. Now, to many people, the idea that what he says, what the work that he develops, he calls it epic theatre. He calls it a combination of epic and a combination of theatre. Now, what do we mean by epic? Many people would already know. Epic is, our examples of epic would be the Iliad, the Mahabharata, and it's supposed to be a work in prose, right? It's supposed to be a very long work, and it's supposed to be a work in prose, whereas dramatic is ideally, very simply, supposed to be something which is enacted by some players, right? So this is a basic difference between the structure, right? They're both known for their futures. But Brecht says that it's a mistaken belief that they are just about the form. He says that the differences is much more, it's more deep-seated. And what is it? He says, according to him, epic theatre is not a contradiction. This is an extract from the text. He says, many people imagine that the term epic theatre is self-contradictory, because there are different ways of narrating the story. Epic and theatre for him are not two different areas, but it was actually based on two different branches of aesthetics. So he says that it's not just the form. In fact, the form actually very often overlaps. So form is not the core difference between drama and theatre. The actual difference, the core difference, the more relevant difference between drama and theatre and epic is that they follow two different methods of construction whose laws were dealt with by two different branches of aesthetics, that they follow different aesthetics, they follow different rules. Okay. Another difference that he attributes to epic theatre, epic theatre and drama, dramatic theatre, or epic and drama, is that drama depends upon the plot, right? Any kind of drama, you can't move on in a drama without something being done in a previous act or in a previous scene, right? So the plot is very, very important for any dramatic work. But for the epic, you can take a pair of scissors and cut it into two individual pieces which remain fully capable of life. This is a quote from the text, which basically means that an epic is so complete in itself, everything would have a certain logic to it. It would be a huge work, but at the same time, even if you cut it into pieces, every character would have a narrative of its own. If you think about Iliad, for example, you would know even, characters which you think are not the main characters have a long backstory, right? So you don't expect an epic to be cut short. And similarly, we've taken the example of Iliad. Even if you look at Mahabharata, many characters would have backstories, right? Why? And it doesn't begin just from the Pandavas. It begins from the story of 3 generations before the Pandavas, right? So it's a very, very long, intricate, it's very, very detailed, right? That's what epic is, and that's the reason an epic is an epic. Okay, and every part of the epic is actually true to life in one way or another. Okay, now we've differentiated between drama and epic. He also suggests that drama has many elements which are similar to an epic. An epic would have elements which could be enacted, so there is an overlap. As technical advances grew, theatre began to evolve, right? This dramatic form kept evolving. Now, as it evolved, you need not have had so many characters. You could do without a lot of telling on stage. So, that popular convention of saying, show not tell. The theatre didn't have to tell everything. You need not have had characters who would tell you what is happening. The setting would be enough, right? So Brecht writes, the stage began to tell a story. The narrator was no longer missing along with the fourth wall. He says that you need not have somebody tell you the story, and also the fourth wall stopped existing. Now, this is a classical, in an earlier form, like what Brecht means is that in the 20th century or by the mid 20th century, audience had grown a lot. The drama theatre form had grown a lot, and while classically, if you think about any kind of classical theory, if you think about Aristotelian theory, about the pure form of drama, Aristotle would want everything to be clear, right? He doesn't want anything to be left ambiguous. Similarly, the Rasa theory clearly tells you what expressions you are supposed to give if the play is of a certain mood. So there is very little scope of subtlety. But these are classical forms of theatre, right? These were forms of theatre where there was no technology available. Once technology started being available, technological advances grew, the stage actually started to tell a story of its own, or the story was very, very subtle. Okay, and we also started breaking the fourth wall. What do we mean by the fourth wall? Fourth wall is actually the assumption that the characters that you're watching in a play or in a movie are living their real life, right? So early 20th century artists had believed that theatre is a replica of real life, that it has to be so similar to real life that there's no perceivable difference between what happens in a drama and what happens in real life. But as dramatists grew, and Brecht was writing much before such thinkers as August Strindberg, who suggested that everything should be natural, Brecht said that theatre doesn't have to be natural if you think about it. And we could even remove the fourth wall. The fourth wall is the wall that separates the character from the audience. And if that is removed, it almost means that the audience becomes a part of the play itself. So if you remember, there was this, as an example of breaking the fourth wall, I can give you the example of the English sitcom of Fleabag, right? Everything is happening in a scene, and suddenly the main character starts talking to the camera. It's addressing you. So that's breaking the fourth wall. That is assuming that one of the characters is actually directly establishing contact with the audience, and audience is also somewhat involved in in this life. So that's an example. And by now, audience had also evolved, so they didn't have to reciprocate the feelings of the characters. They could disassociate themselves from the characters of the play, and the text says the spectator was no longer allowed to submit to the experience uncritically, right? So this is epic theater. Epic theater is something which is where you don't really have to pretend that this is real life, and the fact that many things are not left to the expression. Okay, now we come to the main part, one of the main aspects which he describes in this essay. Okay, he talks about alienation. What is alienation effect? In epic theater, if you've read anything about epic theater, you would know that alienation is a buzzword when it comes to epic theater, understanding epic theater. And some say that this word alienation is inaccurate, and that the German original word for alienation was Verfremdung, which actually is able to describe a situation better. So what do I mean by that? Verfremdung is defamiliarization or an act of distancing. Okay, so he says that it is important to be defamiliarized with a certain issue to understand it completely. If you think of something as an unchangeable part of your life, you would never be able to see the problems in that system at all. Okay, for instance, in Brecht's play Mother Courage and Her Sons, a mother is sending her son to war, right? Now, this may be a common occurrence for the everyday life of people at that time, but this play is supposed to make you feel the futility of the war, right? So it's a familiar scene. Many people would know the absurdity of war, but after having seen this, the absurdity of many people would actually feel they would understand that the play is not for them to feel what is simply expressed in the play. So Verfremdung is actually to defamiliarize yourself from what you see every day, and what you see and then now you start seeing everything from a new angle, right? So Verfremdung or alienation or distancing, whatever you call it, it is to look at the familiar as if it's unfamiliar. You look at familiar as if it's something which through a new light, and you see new aspects of essentially very, very mundane life. Okay, so this is what epic theater is, but there are many misconceptions about epic theater. One misconception about epic theater is that it is supposed to be political, and it's supposed to be so political that it becomes boring. That's not the case actually about epic theater or about Brecht's plays. Epic theater is political, but the plays written by Bertolt Brecht have very, very funny dialogues. They are written very intelligently, and it isn't as if they are difficult. They are difficult to understand. In fact, they move so much that you start thinking about the play more seriously, not just empathizing with them. So you feel that Brecht's plots have funny dialogue. Some of them are even musicals, but they're not difficult to understand. Okay, they're supposed to make you think. They're supposed to make you wonder. Okay, and the final lines in this section written by Brecht are that epic theater spectator says, "I had never thought of this. That's not the way. Oh, that's extraordinary. I hardly believe this. This is going to stop. The sufferings of this man appall me because they are unnecessary." So he says that you need to show a certain such an art form to the people that they get so effective, they get so influenced by it that they want to do something about it. And that's the reason much of Brecht's theatre is called revolutionary theatre. So epic theatre is an art that is supposed to make you feel strongly about reality. It is supposed to make you feel like taking responsibility about your real situation. In the rest of the essay actually goes on. After he has described what he thinks epic theatre is, he enumerates two more important points. He says that even though teaching through art is one of the goals of this kind of theatre, but it's a secondary goal. The first goal of epic theatre is to observe clearly. And lastly, he claims that epic theatre cannot be practiced everywhere, as it requires an audience who would be interested in such productions, who are willing to ask important questions in society and be the change they wish to see. So anyway, if you know about Brecht's life story, you would also know that Brecht had to be exiled. He had to live in exile. In fact, many people believe that he had written his plays after his theory or according to his theory, but that's not how it had panned out chronologically. Actually, much of his plays, many of his very, very popular plays were produced much before his exile, and it was during his exile from his place of birth, that is Germany. It was during his exile that he was able to write about his theory. And so it's not, both theory and his drama influence each other. But in the end of this play, in the end of this particular essay, what he says is that it's not just enough for people to conduct this kind of theatre. It is important for people to also be more adaptable to changes occurring around them. So this was the study of Bertolt Brecht's theatre. I'll see you again. Please let me know if you liked this video. Thank you.